Good. Welcome to this Q&A session. I'd like to start with talking about Genesis chapter 3. And the impression a lot of people have is that Genesis chapter 2 is all about good news, and Genesis chapter 3 is all about bad news. And as a result of that, they interpret the passage with a tendency to just to look for bad news, and then they find the bad news. And when you're dealing with the Bible in translation, you can't always, it's hard to translate all the subtle nuances of an original language into a secondary language. It's just hard. For example, I used to work, Joy and I lived in Africa, in a country where they spoke Lingala. Lingala was the trade language, which all the different tribes used. It wasn't their tribal language. Tribal languages have a lot of good details, but a trade language is simplified so that people can talk to each other over business, but maybe not talk all the details. So it turned out, though, that in the area we worked, there were 21 different tribes. And so the early missionaries said, well, we're going to use the trade language, which was the language, by the way, of one of those tribes. So the trade language was Lingala. And so as soon as we arrived in Africa, Joy and I, having learned French for 2 years, we were able to we had to set aside the French and learn Lingala. And one of the nice things about Lingala is it is simple. And we found out, though, that it's sometimes too simple, and that there was a dear pastor who came from the United States, came down to Kinshasa, the capital city, and he had brought a number of little tracts with him. They were called the Wordless Book. You ever seen the Wordless Book?
Yeah.
Have you? So it's got colors. It's got gold and black and green and red, and so they explained the gospel using these 5 different colors in the Wordless Book. The translator, the African translator, had a problem with that, though, because in Lingala there are only 3 colors. So he had to choose. Well, this one will be number 1. This one, it'll also be number 1. Yeah. It didn't work out very well. In Lingala, you have Pembe, Mwindo, and Motane. Pembe is white, Mwindo is black, and Motani is other. So red is Motani, green is Motani, yellow is Motani, orange is Motani. They're all, gold is Motani, and it just didn't work. And it was nobody's fault. It's just the way the languages worked, except the dear pastor had all these wordless books, which had become worthless books. They would have worked in the tribal languages, which have a lot of details. There's one tribe I know of that would tell time by the tint of the green leaves of a certain plant that would change as the sun rose, got to the zenith, and then came down. The green would change colors noticeably, at least to them. And so what time is it? Well, it's, light green. What time is it? Well, it's dark green. That's how, before they had watches, so they had lots of words for green. But in Lingala, they just had 3 color words. In our English translations, we have maybe some limitations on trying to understand Genesis 3, and it just doesn't come across very clearly. So Joy said, let me simplify it for you. They ate from the fruit of the forbidden tree. What was the fruit of that tree? It was the tree of the knowledge of
Good and evil.
So I've never heard anybody use this term, and I haven't checked it with Joy, but I call that mixed fruit. We got 2 fruit. We got good, we got evil. But the good evil part works itself out throughout Genesis chapter 3 in a good news, bad news pattern. Not every place, but there's lots of places where it's a good news, bad news pattern. When God speaks to the serpent tempter in Genesis 3, verses 14 and 15, that's all bad news. When God speaks to the woman, a lot of people think in verse 16, that's all bad news. But it's not. If you think it's all bad news and you read our English translations, it looks like it could be mixed fruit, but maybe it is all bad news. Does anybody have the ESV translation around? I hope you don't, but if you do, if you have or you can look it up, what's the ESV translation? Is it possible that all of Genesis 3:16 would be bad news based on what you see in the ESV? I don't have one. So
I do have a copy.
Oh, that's a shame. Okay, I'm disappointed in you, Mimi.
I have all, well, we have to compare.
Yeah,
I was.
that's right. That's right.
Did you want me to read it?
Out loud would be helpful to all of us. Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Genesis 3:16.
Yes.
To the woman, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain, you shall bring forth children. Your desires shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you.
Okay, so just slowly read me a line by line. Let me think about that. Let's ask everybody in the group, is that positive or negative? So what's line 1 in the
To the
ESV?
woman, he said,
Yeah.
I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing.
Is that good news or bad news?
Bad news.
Really bad news. Okay, what's the next line?
In pain, you shall bring forth children.
Good news or bad news?
More bad news.
It sounds bad to our ear, right? It's not all bad, but you could maybe see some good in there, even in English. But okay, what's the next line?
Your desires shall be contrary to your husband.
Shall be? Your desire shall be. I don't even understand what that means. Is God telling you your desires shall be? Okay, is that good news or bad news?
Bad news.
Bad news. Yeah.
I see Jenny frowning. Is that good news or bad news? Bad news. Okay, and then the last line.
Last line is, but he shall rule over you.
I have a hard time. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, they say. But he shall rule over you. No wonder people puzzle over this translation. They're trying to figure out what's going on.
Just wait for the notes at the bottom that explain it.
And it depends on whose Bible you're using. You know, is it so-and-so's translation? Is it so-and-so's? Casey, thank you. All terrible news. That's right. Yeah. Okay. I'm horrified by that translation. I've never sat down and thought about it very deeply before, and there it is. All right, let's look for the good news, bad news pattern in the Hebrew words of that same verse. And we could go to any other modern English translation and try and see if it's a little bit better. But frankly, they don't get it across as clearly as it is in my mind. And I hope it is in yours once you look at what Joy put together. So here we go. Ready? God said to her, but let's back up. God came into the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day. They had already been attacked by Satan. He came and he lied to them and he murdered them. And one of the first signs is that they were horrified. They were, we're naked. And when God comes, they ran and hid. Something's really wrong. And God says, Adam, where are you? It could be that he's just saying, Adam, where are you? He's using the word from Genesis 5:2, where he called their name Adam. So it doesn't mean he's picking on one or the other necessarily. But anyhow, the man answers. And 4 times he says, I. Kind of like the, the pirate. I, Captain, but I. Now, he was a newlywed. They were married. They were in the Garden of Eden, bed and breakfast on their honeymoon. They ate the fruit. They were naked. And all he talks about is I. So that's kind of a warping of the situation. At any rate, he answers that thing. And God says, to him, well, who told you? Is that what he says? Who told you you were naked? What's he say? How do you know you're naked?
My NFE says, who told you?
Oh, okay. Who told you?
Who told you that you were naked?
Now, if somebody tells me something, I hear their voice or I see their text message. All right. So who told you you were naked? So I'm thinking there's a voice. And this is the perfect time for the man to say, well, actually, that serpent tempter over there Didn't tell me I was naked, but let me tell you about the conversation we had with the serpent tempter and what happened after that. But he doesn't say anything like that at all. He doesn't confess his own. He says, yeah, I ate. Oh, but before he gets there, he says, you know, the woman that you, doesn't say you gave me, it's the woman you gave to be with me. Okay, so he knows they're partners. The woman you gave to be with me, she gave it to me. Oh, by the way, he said, the woman you gave to be with me. So there are four persons that he could have talked about. He could have talked about the serpent and himself. He didn't. He talked about God and her, which was inappropriate at best and wrong and rebellious at worst. So we've got that going on. Then God turns to her and says, let me see if I can do better with this one. So he says, what have you done? And she says, you know, I've been thinking about this and I see what happened. I didn't get it. I was deceived and I did that. I did those things, but I didn't do them to disobey or be rebellious or, you know, she just was deceived. That's enough. So I was deceived, but she doesn't just say that. She brings up the serpent. So now the serpent who is trying to hide there kind of saying, okay, I hope this all blows over quickly. It didn't. She says, the serpent deceived me and I ate. Now God is going to talk to her some more, but he says, I'll get back to you. Hang on a minute. So he gets back to her in verse 16, but first he turns to the serpent and says, based on what she said, cursed are you. And he talks to the serpent in a pattern of 6 different things. Cursed are you all the days of your life, et cetera, et cetera. Because you did this, there's 6 different things as he talks to the serpent. The interesting thing is that those 6 different things show up in the speech to the man. So when translators and just general readers come to this passage, there's God, and then there's the serpent, the woman, and the man. People have a tendency, did you find this to be true? They link the serpent, the woman, and the man together. Or they link the woman and the man together. Or they link the serpent and the woman together. They're just kind of linking them together. If you're going to link anybody, you're going to link, according to the Hebrew pattern, you're going to link the serpent and the man.
Yeah.
And none of those 6 elements are addressed to the woman in verse 16. He doesn't say because to her. He doesn't say all the days of your life. He doesn't say curse with using the Hebrew word curse. He doesn't do any of those things. So in the Hebrew pattern, there's a big difference right there. Okay, now let's look at Genesis 3:16, the first words. He says to her, multiplying, I will multiply. Is that a good or a bad start to his words to her? And have you come across that anywhere else? Multiplying, I will multiply.
It depends what is being multiplied. It could be good.
Could be good. Now, this is loose. This is a place where this phrase to multiply, I will multiply, arba, is used 3 times in the Old Testament. And it's all 3 times it's very significant. Once is here. And then the other 2 times are relating to Abraham and the 2 women in his life. And God says to Abraham, multiplying, I will multiply your offspring as the sand on the seashore and the stars in the heaven. That's a blessing, very clearly a blessing. And then having to do with his other offspring, he makes the same phrase, multiplying, I will multiply, and you will have, vast number of offspring. So the Hebrew mind, who knows those 2 other passages in Genesis, would look at this, to multiply, I will multiply, and you go, oh, hey, this is good. Good start. So the beginning of this verse, God's words to her, is positive. The end of line 1 is her own, has to do with offspring, or specifically conception. Well, that just fits right the pattern. To multiply, I will multiply your offspring like the sand of the seashore and all that kind of stuff. So the first part of line 1 is positive, and the last part of line 1 is positive, we have a hint. It's the mixed fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so we have a negative element in the middle. Multiplying, I will multiply your itzabon. If you look at the King James, you can see there are two things that are multiplied. God says, I will take action and I will multiply two things. I will multiply your X and I will multiply your Y. So first I'm going to multiply your X. That's itzabon, which is sorrowful toil. And I will multiply your heron. I will multiply your conception. So Joy came along and she says, you know, look at this. There is a linkage pattern. The first one links down to verse 17 to the man, and the second one links back up to verse 15 to the serpent. So multiplying, I will multiply your sorrowful toil, itzabon, just stands there all alone. We don't know anything about it. It's just a one-time word. And I said to Joy, how come we don't know more about itzabon? And she said, well, that's a proleptic prophecy. Some of you heard me talk about this before. And when she mentioned it to me, I said, I don't remember what that is, if I ever knew. What is a proleptic prophecy? So God's saying, I'm going to multiply, and there's going to be this something, and I'm telling you about the near future, what it's going to be. You're going to have itzabon. You're going to have sorrowful toil. And she said, a proleptic prophecy is where the results are given, but the cause is not yet given. So the result is she's going to have sorrowful toil, but she doesn't know why. But right away, when God turns to the man and talks to him, we find out why. So God says to the man, because you have done this, I'm going to curse the ground, and you will have sorrowful toil when you work the ground. So now we know. And when we were in Africa, I know who did the field work there. It was the women. The men did some, but basically the women had to do the field work. They were growing the manioc. They were cultivating the taro roots. They were taking care of the corn, or they were doing all that kind of work. They were pounding, in the mortar and pestle, they were pounding the whatever product seemed the best way they could in the villages, the way they processed almost everything was to mortar and pestle and bang and bang and bang and bang. By the way, there's a terrible, I shouldn't smile. There's a terrible tradition among some countries, tribes, that in the beginning, God and heaven were close to the man and the woman. People and heaven were close together. But that every time that the woman was raising up her pounding stick to go into this wooden bowl where you smash the nuts from the palm tree or whatever you're cooking, every time she raised up, she banged into heaven. And it irritated God so much and made so much noise that he pulled heaven farther away. That's the African version of Pandora. You blame the woman for all the bad stuff. Heaven's gone far away, and now we don't have heaven down here. It's her fault. Anyhow, where were we? Oh, you're going to have sorrowful toil when you work the ground. And there's one more verification of this, Genesis 5:29. That's the only other time we have this word itzabon. So it's important. If you only have a word 3 times and it's in a restricted context, you can figure out, what the meaning is. Genesis 5:29, it's the parents of baby Noah coming along, and they say, wow, maybe this one will relieve us. There's a play on words in the Hebrew there, but this one will relieve us from the sorrowful toil that we have as we work the ground with our hands that the Lord has cursed. So what is it to have itzabon? It's the sorrowful toil you have from doing field work with your hands. And when Adam and Eve went out of the Garden of Eden, how did they grow things? Did he stand by and supervise while she worked the ground with her hands? Well, God told him, you're going to have sorrowful toil while you work the ground that I cursed because of you. So we know he had it. He worked the ground, and she did too. And they both had itzabon. So back to Genesis 3:16, line A or 1. Multiplying, I will multiply. Good news. Sorrowful toil. Bad news. Heron, conception. Is that good news?
Yep.
Well, that's good news because you're going to have conception. And who is she going to conceive? The pattern is multiplying, I will multiply your seed, your zerah. And zerah was used in verse 15. And Heron which is conception, is just like Zerah. So you're going to have offspring. And why is it hopeful? And why is it good news that she's going to have offspring? I'll pick on Carolyn. Why is it good news that she's going to have offspring?
You mean in general or because of a prophecy? I mean, it's good to have children to prolong the human race. They bring a blessing.
Right. That's going to come up in line 2. That's exactly right. But line 1, he has just spoken to the serpent and he's just starting to talk to the woman. So what's this about her having offspring?
Oh, her offspring will strike the serpent's head.
That's right. Yeah. So that's the promise of the Messiah. Now, when I first went to seminary, I used to work with Youth for Christ high school students, and I have this bad sense of humor still with me. When I went to seminary, I heard about this Latin word called the protevangelium, and I'd never heard it before. I'd been a Christian worker, full-time worker for 4 years. I'd never heard the word protevangelium. I'd gotten along without it. But they said, look, that's a Latin word, which means the first announcement of the gospel. And it's in Genesis 3:15. And I thought, why would God give the good news of the gospel of Jesus coming to crush his head? Why would he give that to the serpent? That seems incomplete to me. It just bothered me. And it didn't bother me too bad, but it just bothered me. But when Joy started talking about, look, what the King James says and what the Hebrew says, I will multiply your heron, your conception. I went, oh, okay. He put the hammer down on the serpent tempter. He says, you're going to get crushed by her seed. Then he turns to her and says, I'm confirming to you, I'm blessing you. You will have that offspring. That's part 2. That's the whole statement of the protevangelium. It leaks into Genesis 3:16. Now we can go, yeah, that'll preach. That's great. That's good news. So we've got good news, bad news, good news in line 1. Let's go to line 2. With what? And Carolyn, maybe you get the honors for this one because you already brought up line 2. With something, you will do something.
In pain, you will bring forth children.
Yep.
Yeah, children.
Yeah. I like everything except the first or second word there. Okay. So it's
not really supposed to be pain. When I was going through childbirth classes, the midwife teaching it said, it's not pain, it's more like effort. And I think that was true. I had 9 children, so couldn't have been that bad, right?
No, now I know one of your daughters. What number was she?
She was the 5th. She was my first daughter.
Oh,
I had 4 boys first, so. Yeah.
No wonder you kept trying. I need some relief here. Okay. And she's very nice. So I used to think that too. With effort, you will bring forth children. Let's save that first part for a minute. Will bring forth is yalad in Hebrew, and children is banim in Hebrew. So yalad, with something you will bring forth. This verb is found other places, and real easily you talk about the genealogies. And it says, in the old King James, it didn't make sense in English. It's a word we don't use at all. It's kind of funny sounding. So-and-so begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so. Okay. So the NIV changes that and says, so-and-so became the father of. Yalad, became the father of. So became the father of has nothing to do with the process of childbirth, right? So-and-so delivered so-and-so. It's not that. He became the father of. In other words, this is my kid. He's going to grow up. He's going to live this way. I'm going to raise him. All this is involved. So-and-so became the father of. So we could. Joy doesn't do it this way. She says, bring forth. But we could say Eve is going to become the mother of children. All right. If she's going to become the mother of children, that focuses on the larger picture of being mom. The children part is, I think, a fulfillment of Genesis chapter 1, where God says it's a blessing, creation, mandate, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Okay. So when he says you're going to certainly have conception, that's a singular word in Hebrew. It could have multiple meanings, and we now know it did, but it's just one. So you could have one kid who could crush that serpent's head. But now he gives her more details. He says, with whom you will bring forth children. So you will bring forth children. Is that good news or bad news in this context? Children.
Well, effort is not, it's challenging. Bringing forth children is good.
Yeah.
So in a bad and good,
So I want to emphasize that the bring forth has nothing to do with the act of childbirth. Whether she had pain or whether she had, whatever, bring forth is not talking about the act of childbirth. Yes, Casey, children are a blessing. And when we moved to Africa, people were so excited that we were pregnant. Well, Joy was pregnant. I just saw a different and a much more positive experience. Everybody said, "Oh, congratulations, you're pregnant," and they all rejoiced with us because it's great to have children. But in this case, theologically, it's wonderful that she would have children. In other words, look, in the day that you eat thereof, you will die. So they're waiting. Are we going to fall over now or next hour? What's going to happen? Well, no, they became mortal. And 900 years or so later, they did die. But what's going to happen in the meantime? Let's talk about it again. In line 1, God takes action in 2 ways. Then Joy says the pattern is in lines 2, 3, and 4. God doesn't say, I'm going to act again. He starts describing what's going on. So he describes for her, he says, with something, you will bring forth children. And if the you will bring forth children is not focusing on her act of childbirth, what is it? I was listening to the Bible Project the other day, and the teacher there, forget his name.
Bob Mackey.
Yeah. So he said, instead of with effort or instead of with sorrow or instead of with pain, he says it should be with grief. And Joy confirmed that. So I talked to her about that. She said, well, yeah, sorrow, she would prefer to say sorrow, but psychological grief, sorrow. The problem is that the King James in line 1 says with sorrow you will, and conception, and then it says in sorrow. So it looks like you've got sorrow, sorrow. It makes it look like God stuttered. Listen to these words very carefully in Hebrew. In English, you hear it, sorrow, sorrow. You think it's the same thing. Line 1, sorrow, line 2, sorrow. But in Hebrew, it's itzabon, etzev. They're not the same word. Itzabon, etzev. They both have the little root for tree, etz, in them. So it's a kind of nice pun, but they're not the same word. And we already know what itzabon means. It means sorrowful toil when you're out doing field work and you break your nail, and it gets worse than that. Okay. So itzabon, they took care of that. So line 1, by the way, has nothing to do with the act of childbirth. Oh, what did the ESV say for line 1, Mimi?
It says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing.
Yeah, the game shows, you got the wrong answer. The buzzer goes off.
But the King James Version says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception.
Yeah. Okay. Bing. That's a good sound. Bing. All right. So we got
But
that.
in line 2, the King James says, in pain, you will bring forth children.
No, that's the New King James.
Okay. You're right. It is New King James.
The 1611 King James says in sorrow.
Okay.
And so these guys became overachievers with the New King James, and they said pain, and they made a mistake. Okay. Because the word sorrow, you can, that's talking about psychological, the whole thing. Did she have sorrow or did she have grief because she was the mother of more than one child? Okay. More than one child means more than one, means 2, or could mean a lot more. Probably did. Absolutely did. So when she had 2 children, who were they?
Cain and Abel.
Did she have any grief?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes, she did. Maybe not initially, but eventually, yes, she lost both of them.
As the mother, not as the baby deliverer, but as the mother
No.
of these 2 boys, So I tried to write that up and I showed it to Joy and she said, nah, wait a minute. I said, she'll have grief because Cain turns into a murderer. She said, well, wait, Cain smarted off to God first. Cain has a bad attitude. You know, he's arguing with God, right? There's a nice description, pretty detailed description of Cain's bad attitude. And then he does kill his brother. So it's pretty involved what's wrong in Cain's heart. And growing up with those kids or raising those kids, she probably saw, well, I can't make it up. I don't know. There's the bad joke about the preacher where the Bible was clear, he was clear, and where the Bible wasn't clear, he was still clear. I'm not going to be clear because I don't know. All right, so line 1 is God takes action in 2 ways. You're going to have sorrowful toil, not because of you, but because of him. I'm going to curse the ground. But you're going to experience the results of that. You'll have sorrowful toil working the ground. And I'm going to confirm your offspring. It's going to have more meaning now than before. It was great. You're going to have children, but now you're going to be able to crush the head of your attacker. Line 2, with grief or with sorrow, Joy prefers sorrow. With sorrow, you will bring forth children. So the sorrow is the bad news and the children is the good news. See that? Mixed fruit, good news, bad news. Let's go to lines 3 and 4 because they're actually a pair. Line 3, desire, your teshuka, is to your husband. So there's really only 2 other places where we can, it's interesting how all these words have 3 occurrences here and there, but teshuka is found in Song of Solomon, where it's talking about another lover. Certainly Adam and Eve were lovers in the Garden of Eden. So we've got another lover, Solomon and his wife. Somebody described her as his wife. And his desire, so it's not a male or female thing. Eve has got this desire, and Solomon has this desire. So in the love relationship, husband and wife, you have desire. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Desire.
Good thing.
It's a good thing. Now, when I was in seminary, there was a gal who was also in seminary, and she had different kind of teachers, and they kind of had a different kind of prejudice. And they said, well, wait a minute. In Genesis chapter 4, there's a teshuka there. And there it's sin is crouching at the gate. God's warning Cain, and look out, it desires to master you, but you should rule over it. He tells Cain. And so she said, oh, look at that. Genesis 4, real close to Genesis 3. The desire is a bad thing. It's like an evil animal desiring a person. And she's the same way. That's just awful. First of all, Joyce says, look at the pattern. Genesis 2 and 3 is a bell curve, is a chiasm, is a tightly interwoven single passage. Genesis 2 and 3, Garden of Eden, that is a separate passage. You get into the Garden of Eden, you get out of the Garden of Eden, you move on. This is a different section now over in Genesis 4. Genesis 4 and 5 is a whole different way of writing a passage of structure. It's just different. You cannot say that because 2 and 3 and 4 are next to each other that they all interpret each other. They don't. But the content of this thing, that this desire, this beast is desiring you, to say that's what that means, then you're going to have to say Solomon was this, it's just not right. But the earliest translation of the Hebrew text into Greek by 70 scholars way back when, before Jesus, it's called the LXX, the Latin number LXX 70, the Septuagint, did not take the word teshuka as desire. They did it as turning. And they did it for root word, meaning I can see how they did it, but you have to just decide how you're going to translate that. And they said your turning is, and then the question is, your turning is, well, who are you where are you turning? Who are you turning to? Who are you turning away from? And all kinds of speculation got involved with the turning. I used to tell people that you got to be careful about that group of people that did the Septuagint translation, because these Jewish scholars back then well, at least in the Babylonian Talmud, they came up with 10 curses on Eve. And after church the other day, we went downstairs to the gym for the Christian tradition of eating donuts. That's what happens in our church. And so everybody gets a sugar high after the sermon. And I'm talking to a young fella, and he said, "Oh, well, I was on a Zoom discussion the other day, and the fella was talking about the." I asked him for the details. He hasn't gotten them to me yet, but as I recall, he said there were 39 curses or something back then. There was 10 curses on the serpent, 10 curses on the woman, 10 curses on the man. And because the ground can't die, but it was cursed too, there were 9 curses on the ground. So they got 39 curses that they're finding from this passage. And Joy came, she came to me that one day and she said, notice however you say the word and decline it, to curse is twice in Genesis 3. So let's pay attention. It's twice. There's not 39. There's not 10. And there's none for the woman. The word arur is not used for the woman. All right. So your desire is to your, you can say to. Your desire is to your husband. And then that's the end of God talking to her. And then he turns to the man and he says, now I want you to rule over her. I know this is the traditional way I did it in the villages. And then I would wait for an answer and then they would have to correct me. And they were very polite. They hated to correct me because they weren't sure whether I was making a mistake or whether they were making a mistake. But eventually they got around to correcting me. So did God then stop talking to her and then tell the man, go rule over her? No, he didn't talk to the man until verse 17. This is in 16. He says, but he shall rule over you. Let's think about the man. God ruled over the man and the woman. And he blessed them and he told them what to do and told them what not to do. When the man decided to eat the fruit, he put God aside as his ruler and decided to rule over his own actions. So the man is rebelliously ruling over himself. He blamed God, he blamed the woman, and now God says, yeah, well, that's a pattern he's going to keep doing. Now he wants to dethrone you as far as he's concerned. He wants to dethrone me as ruling over you, woman, and he's decided that he is going to rule over you in my place. He is going to usurp my authority and sinfully, rebelliously rule over you. And she went, oh, I'm so glad. You see, if she's going to accept the man ruling over her instead of God ruling over her, that's disobedience. She's supposed to let God rule over her. If you want to know who has the power and authority over her and over him, it's God. And wouldn't you want to have God? God did a good job making them, wonderful job. He made the Garden of Eden. He brought them together. They had a wonderful relationship with each other. They had a wonderful relationship with God. He warned them, don't do that. So God is wonderful. He's good. Who do we want ruling over us except God? So what do we have then in lines 3 and 4, or C and D there in Genesis 3:16? We have good news, your desire. I look it in your heart. You were tricked, but you weren't sour or nasty. Your desire is still good. Joy calls it affection. I'd like to call it love. Your affection is still for your husband. But, so the good news, your affection is still for your husband. But, bad news, he will rule over you. So the mixed fruit of the tree is good and bad, good and evil, and it turns out to be good and bad. Good news, bad news. I will multiply, that's good. Your sorrowful toil, oh, that's bad. Your conception, that's good. Your grief, that's bad. Your children, that's good. Your desire, that's good. Him ruling over you, that's bad. It's not all bad, but it's not all good. But it's remarkably good considering what was going on.
So the ESV decided to improve on it, isn't it?
I like to say clarify. Okay. They clarified their opinion, and the ESV, that they do that on purpose throughout the whole Bible. They say, this is the way it's supposed to be, and even when there's good news, they turn it into bad news, and I don't like that.
The Living Bible actually is not very good either. I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband.
Oh,
but he will rule over you.
You're going to be the bad guy. You're going to desire to control him. But the good news is he will rule over you. Oh.
Sounds like a great prediction.
But look how it says pregnancy in the first line, and her own is clearly not, even.
Well, pregnancy is not too bad. Because again, this is where, you got 3 colors instead of 5. So the word heron could be pregnancy, but it's not talking about the end of pregnancy. And it could be conception. And yeah, it does include the beginning of pregnancy. There's no pain in the beginning of pregnancy. So,
Okay, child.
Yeah,
Right.
Right. Yeah. So we won't fight with them over pregnancy, but we will disagree with them where they're disagreeable. Now, I don't rejoice at the bad translation, and I'm horrified by it because the implications that flow from that. So people come up with a theology of, wow, God was nasty to her. Why was he so? Why that way? Well, she must have been a big problem, and so she deserved it.
She deserved it. Huh? I mean, the Southern Baptist Church, right? The denomination. Why can't women be pastors? Well, number one, because the man was created first, and second, because the woman was the first one to eat of the fruit. So
God could have made twins, but he didn't do it that way. He did it because you'd have the twins, and we say, well, did God have a good relationship with each of the twins? Oh, yeah. Well, we think, yeah. But see, if he has a good relationship with one, puts him to sleep, he's out of it, and has a good relationship with the other. Now we know that God has a personal interaction with each of those two, which is important for our theology. God cares about you. And so this idea about first, they're putting stuff in the text that's not in the text, just not. But you're right there on the 1 Timothy thing, Luce. Then there's a reference to Adam and Eve, direct naming Adam and Eve in 1 Timothy 2. Then because they've misinterpreted and misunderstood what happened in the Garden of Eden, they take that understanding and they plop it into Genesis or 1 Timothy 2, and they say, see, this is what this means. And I would much rather talk to them not about 1 Timothy yet, but about Genesis 3:16 first, and clear that up together. And there's no reason we should have any fight or disagreement over this. The Hebrew, I think, is very clear. And every time people wander off, Joy comes back with another example of these patterns and these sub patterns in Genesis 2 and 3. It just locks the meaning in. You can't go astray.
The commentary for the ESV, if I can read a few lines, it's interesting because they're saying what happened before the fall. So it says, these words from the Lord, referring to your desire will be contrary to your husband, but he will rule over you. It says, these words from the Lord indicate that there will be an ongoing struggle between the woman and the man for leadership in the marriage relationship. The leadership role of the husband and the complementary relationship between husband and wife that were ordained by God before the fall have now been deeply damaged and distorted by sin. So where do they get that the leadership role? They were to subdue and rule the earth together in Genesis 2. So
because the man created first, that's why they claim that he was first and he was the leader.
Right.
Yeah. So they get it from 1 and 2. So they have made this whole thing that the man is the leader, and there are 2 different roles, one for the man and one for the woman as his helper, his assistant, to help him in the work.
they're assuming because he was born first. Does it make him better or, ruler because he was created first,
Yeah. They base it on that. Yes.
Right. No, I know. So again, it's not.
It makes me think of these parades, and then I try to think about the cultures I've been to and experienced. But if you have a parade, who comes first in the parade and who comes last? It could be, one way in one culture and could be another way in another culture. But in the cultures I know, the climax is at the end, and you have all these different people in the floats and the parades or whatever, the marching soldiers and and then at the end, da-da-da-da, here comes Santa Claus, or here comes the president, or here comes, the king and queen, here they come. And so we have this nice parade of creation. And at the end of Genesis 2, who do we have? I'd rather say we have the man and the woman. But if you want to get detailed, we have the man, and then we have the woman. So, we don't argue that because I don't think that's what it teaches. But
Can I ask a question about Eve? When God was telling her these things, would you say that the person in the story interpreted God's words to her correctly when she later said she had gotten a man from the Lord and that was potentially going to be this Messiah figure? So even though she was incorrect that it wasn't going to be Cain, did she have the right idea as far as what God was predicting?
Yeah, and the Hebrew is such that it could even be, I have gotten a man, the Lord.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it could be
The
that.
Lord. So certainly she is expecting the offspring to be the one who's going to crush Satan's head. And all the theological implications of that, we know it was the Lord, Jesus. Did she think it was going to be the Lord? I don't know, but it's a statement of faith on her part. We don't hear anything else from the man either later on. That's it. The last word we have is a word of faith from her. Good testimony. I'm going to put an end to the recording right now because I want to talk to you about a couple other things first. Okay. So that's the end of the recording.